Yes, now we have. Okay, so now I have to say all that all over again. So welcome to the people that are watching online. Glad to have you all with us. We're going to be turning in our Bibles to the book of Matthew once again, continuing in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And next week, we shall conclude chapter 5. So we've only been on it for, about 6 weeks or something like that, maybe longer. So now that we're almost finished with chapter 5, we just have chapter 6 and chapter 7 to go with the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus covered a lot of topics. However, there's relatively few verses given to each topic in this one passage, so it means we get to expound upon it quite a bit. So, Matthew chapter 5. Today we are, Last week we talked about what Jesus had to say about taking oaths and making oaths and using words when you shouldn't use them, using the Lord's name in vain, and all of that. And so today, Jesus goes on to a slightly different matter, moved from the relationship between you and God as far as the words that you use, or in that regard, to this next topic, which, if we have the title up on the screen, Turning the Other Cheek. How many like this phrase? Right, everybody should be raising their hands. So, how many like practicing this phrase? Yeah, Miss Anita. She does that all the time, unfortunately, because a lot of people give her a lot of grief, like people that don't assist in helping out with VBS. And so I need to stop driving this too hard because I'm going to scare away the crowd. So, we're just going to go ahead and read these, 4 verses, I believe. I'd have to think about it later on, whether or not you add the first verse into the number and whatnot. I can't think about that stuff while I'm trying to talk. So, starting with verse 38 in Matthew chapter 5. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's it. We can close the Bible and go home. No. You shouldn't be nodding your head. So, but with that verse, Jesus, like all the other ways that he introduces the topic throughout like 5 or 6 of the previous topics in this chapter, says, you have heard that it has been said. With a lot of them, they were the traditions that people have brought about that were not part of the law that God gave to them. However, this one verse that he's referring to right now was actually given by God, believe it or not. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That was actually a law given by God. So, kind of changes somewhat. In this regard, he's not so much abolishing the tradition of the Pharisees and the scribes by overturning or overruling what they say, but in this case, he's basically making a difference between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant under grace, and the difference in that. So, in the Old Testament, in, I believe, Exodus and in Leviticus, there were, it would say something along the lines of this verse in verse 38, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Basically, with the Old Testament law and whatnot, with the way that God wanted the nation of Israel to be governed and whatnot, is if someone does something intentionally to harm another person, that the consequence should be equal retribution against that person. Equal and exact retribution. If not, on the side of, like, literally, if 2 guys got in a fight and one of them knocked out the other's tooth, literally the judge in Israel would be perfectly fine in giving someone the right to go over and knock out that guy's tooth. In that case, as the verse says, a tooth for a tooth. And however, that was, I'm pretty sure, not the way that it usually worked, because God also gave a substitute for that method, which is just make the guy pay ever so much money, which would be enough to compensate for whatever damages that he caused in his action of sin. So that's the way that it worked under the Old Testament with the nation of Israel. And Jesus says, you have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And then Jesus says in verse 39, but I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. And then the last verse, verse 42, the last verse we're going to look at. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. So, at this point, Jesus is completely overturning the idea of self-entitlement and other people destroying one's self-respect and whatnot. Unfortunately, we see that a lot all over the world today, particularly in the United States, because we have the privilege of getting picky about our honor and whatnot, whereas in other countries, if you're not in the, correct class of life or something like that, you don't exactly have that privilege due to the fact that anyone could take that away from you anytime they wanted. But in the United States, we do in fact have the privilege of choosing to be that way. However, Jesus totally overrules that philosophy and that idea with these verses, which something I was thinking about is that a lot of the ideas that Jesus brought about in the New Testament, which the shock of shocks, they don't exactly go well with sinful nature. But not only that, but with our human character and whatnot, and our personality that we have in our flesh. For instance, with the verse 38, ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Humans love when justice is served, with the condition that it's being served in favor of them. So, which even like in fiction, in movies and whatnot, like everybody loves when the villain takes over the world and whatnot, and after that the hero comes along and destroys the villain. Like that's the climax that everybody cheers at because justice was served out in that situation. It's interesting how now, as time slowly goes on in movies and media and whatnot, we're starting to praise the villains more than the heroes in the stories, which is kind of frustrating and kind of gives a validity to the idea that the earth is not progressively getting better, as a lot of people mistakenly think, which brings about, I'll just throw this out there, that's a great proof that the world, that destroys the philosophy or the idea that the world is going to get so good that Jesus will just come to claim the kingdom that's already been established. That is not how it's going to work. The world's just going to keep getting worse and worse to the point where Jesus comes along and vanquishes the evil in order to establish the kingdom. So if you haven't noticed, things in the world aren't getting better. So, but I was thinking with these different ideas as well, that it's kind of interesting looking at these ideas that Jesus puts forward of turning the other cheek and whatnot, in that, I guess, in our flesh and whatnot, when someone would see someone acting in such a way like someone, say, taking this literally, someone comes along, slaps someone across the face. If someone were to see the other person turn the other cheek to offer it to him to slap the other one as well, like they would think the guy's insane and whatnot. And then with all of Jesus' other teachings throughout the Old Testament, the New Testament, Old Testament as well, because it's the same God, regarding love, forgiveness, reconciliation, and whatnot, it would almost seem, this is like total like sarcastic voice, like you would almost get the idea that God likes restoration more than he likes dealing out judgment, with all the teachings that he's given on it, and with all the teaching that Jesus gave about it, which, when you think about it, Jesus absolutely never defended himself when people tried to attack him. Like people literally were trying to throw him off a cliff, and it says that he just walked right past him. And then when they weren't welcome in Samaria or something like that, James and John asked Jesus if he wanted them to call down fire from heaven. Honestly, like they had the power to do that. So, and also it's kind of funny that John was one of the two that asked Jesus that, because he's known throughout the Bible as the apostle of love. And he's one of the two who said, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to vanquish these sinful people that rejected you. To which Jesus replied, you know not what spirit you are of. And afterwards he says, I came not to judge the world, but to save the world. That was Jesus' response to them wanting to get even with the world. And so looking at this, we're going to break it down with the context of the culture that they're living in. Something else that might not be too much of a shock is that the Jews were, and somewhat still are, a very, very prideful people, which they have, I guess you could almost say, reason to be, due to the fact that in the Bible they are referred to literally as God's chosen people. Like, that, they didn't make that up. That was literally given by God himself. He gave them that title. So because of that, it leads to a lot of like a superiority complex in the people, that they have the ability to look down on other people because God chose them to bring the Messiah through their lineage and through their sect of people. So with that, this teaching of Jesus probably stung a little bit more for them, possibly even than it does for us, even though all of us are prideful people. However, what Jesus was teaching in this passage had literally never been taught before. All the other teachings in the Old Testament, yes, were like if the other nations get grafted into Israel and accept your traditions and the Lord your God as their God and whatnot, then they are to be accepted. They are to be treated just as equally as one of y'all. However, for the heathen world and whatnot, God literally had different groups of them wiped out by Israel because of their wickedness. And along comes Jesus in the New Testament and says, in the Old Testament it was said that equal judgment shall be paid out, but he says, but I say to you, when someone slaps you across the face, turn the other cheek to him. It's total like goes like absolutely against what everyone would want to do. Trying to think of a good example. Here's a good one. Say someone cuts you off in traffic. I don't know if the audience is too young. How many drive in here? All right. How many have been cut off in traffic before? Okay. Going to have to think of another more relatable illustration here. Let's see. Someone steals your seat. How many are like my family in that we have assigned seating at the dinner table? All right. How many like sitting next to one particular sibling and dislike sitting next to one specific sibling? Okay, I think that's maybe a little bit more relatable an illustration. But say, for example, that someone did something like that, or you got mad at someone for doing something, and they totally blew it off, like ignored you, whatnot. You tried getting one of your parents involved in something like that, and your parent sided with them instead. I think the typical natural response for all of us would be, like in our minds, thinking at that point, what can I do when mom's not watching so that I can basically do the exact same thing back to them so that they can know what it feels like. Ultimately, when you try to do that, it does not make anything better. It just makes things worse. But that's the natural response, is that we want to get even. Being me, I have a bad tendency among specific people that if someone is one-upping me in a conversation or something like that, like, I won't accept it. I'll just keep talking even if I know I'm wrong, to the point where I just make myself look like a bigger fool than I already was beforehand. Afterwards, try to deflect it into a joke and whatnot to make myself feel less guilty about it afterwards. But typically, that's sadly the way it goes. I'm trying to work on that. Please pray for me regarding that. But in stuff like that, everybody likes getting even. It gratifies our sinful flesh to know that we served out justice. So much so that there's a verse in the New Testament where God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. says that specifically so that we don't try to get vengeance ourselves. So I guess I can, well, I don't know how many people have seen the movie. However, what is it? If Batman were to have a catchphrase, one of the phrases in that is literally, "I am vengeance," which is basically takes the law into his own hands in order to serve out the justice that he thinks is adequate. Which some could argue, like, with that storyline and whatnot, that the local government is corrupt anyway, so nothing is getting done, so therefore he should be doing it. However, that would start a massive argument as far as the comics go and whatnot, rather than spiritual topics. However, pertaining to this, when it comes to it, everybody likes getting revenge and getting even with other people. Makes you feel good for about 5 seconds. Then afterwards you feel bad about it. What's even worse is when you don't get revenge until way after. So for all that time, you're just harboring up that anger to the point where literally you do worse than they originally did to you, just because you've been dwelling on it for so long. And wasn't exactly the case in the Old Testament under the law, due to the fact that they could literally go to a judge and the judge would say, based on the law of God, since you did this to him, we have to do something of equal retribution to you. So justice was served right then and there. But what Jesus is saying in verse 39, "But I say unto you that ye resist not evil. Whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other one also." I actually heard 2 different videos that I was listening to today on this topic, which both of them I disagree with as far as their interpretation of what Jesus was talking about when he used this phrase. However, both of them had the right idea in mind. It just, or one of them, it was not exactly taking the literal interpretation. The other one sounded like he was totally going against what Jesus is teaching, and then he came right back around to it. So, but one of them, don't know if this view is correct, said that in the custom of the time, that have no proof whatsoever that this man is a noted biblical scholar or not. But once again, since it's the Bible, we can share our thoughts about it. So he says that in the time of Rome and whatnot, that because of the Roman oppression and occupation of the land of Israel, and the Jews hated the Romans because of that, that the Romans would feel free anytime they wanted, when they felt a Jew was offending them or something, to literally smack them across the face, to kind of let them know who's in charge in a very humiliating fashion. Whereas the other guy I was listening to went the route saying that Jesus was not talking about a literal slap across the face, which I kind of believe that he was. But he was going down the method of an insult in that form of slap across the face. However, both ideas Jesus was referring to, I believe, in this passage, where someone slaps you across the face. Jesus says right here, turn the other cheek. Which, in my younger years, I believe that I thought for a while that meant turn and walk away. However, that is not what Jesus was saying. What Jesus is literally saying is, someone slaps you across one cheek, he says, turn the other one to give him the opportunity to do the same thing to the other side. Basically saying, open yourself up for that attack again. It's don't retaliate about it. And he says at the beginning of that verse that ye resist not evil. That if someone is attacking you in that sense of insulting you, and because of your beliefs and whatnot, would literally smack you across the face, Jesus says right here, don't hinder them or don't stop them from doing that. Which is interesting because that's not at all what we like to do, especially in America, because we are a prideful to the point of stubbornness people about our independence, freedom, and can't think of another word that would fit here. Do-it-yourself kind of people. But with this passage, Jesus says, literally, turn to him on the other side. There was a story I remember hearing of a man who, before he got saved, was, I don't remember if he was in a gang or not, might have been in a gang, might have just always been in the bars, that type of situation, always got in fights, was one of the biggest, meanest guys there, and could always beat everyone up. Then one day he got saved. Then what do you know? He became a pastor. Started pastoring a church and became the nicest man on the planet. Next thing you know, one day while he's preaching a sermon, a guy that happened to be at those bars when he was younger and whatnot walked up to him after the service, slapped him across the face. Says in that moment, more than anything, he wanted to tear the guy's arms off or something in his flesh, which he possibly could have been able to do that physically. However, he's a pastor. Not only that, he's a Christian. So he has a reputation to maintain, and God does not want him retaliating. So he literally, at that moment, turned the other cheek, pointed at it, and says, now hit this one. And the guy just said, so Christianity is true. Got saved. Which, that I think puts a nail in the coffin of the argument that Jesus does not want you to offer the other cheek to people, because in that case, a person literally gets to spend the rest of his life in eternity with Jesus rather than in hell, due to the fact that someone was willing to turn the other cheek and offer it to the man. And going on in the next verse, verse 40, and if any man will sue thee at the law, or just means the court, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. This is something that is pretty interesting. Jesus is practically saying, if someone takes you to the court, doesn't even say whether or not the argument is valid. If someone sues you at the court and would literally take the shirt off your back, he says, give him your jacket as well. It's like, that doesn't make sense. It's counterintuitive, it seems, to our human nature. And then, there's another one that very much ties in with the culture of the time. Verse 41, and whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. With the Roman oppression and occupation of Israel, the Roman soldiers that were stationed throughout the different cities had a bunch of armor and a bunch of equipment with them that they carried around with them everywhere. And because the Jews were the oppressed, basically captives of the land, the Roman soldiers there was literally a law that was, if a Roman soldier basically wants you to carry his stuff for him, he has the ability to do that, to order you to do that. However, he had a limit as to how far he could force you to carry his stuff, which was 1 mile. So basically, no matter what you're doing in your day, if a Roman soldier comes up, basically hands you all the heavy stuff that he's got with him and says, come on, we're walking a mile over here, you literally have to stop whatever you're doing, go with the Roman soldier. Otherwise, you could basically face charges and lose a lot more. So your best option was to go with the Roman soldier, which basically just made the Jews' opinion of the Romans even worse in that regard, because a lot of them were being very oppressive in the fact that they had the ability to do so because they were the ones in charge. And Jesus says in this passage, whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, or if a Roman soldier comes along, hands you his stuff, and says, we're going a mile, Jesus says, go with him twain, or go 2 miles. Only one's required of you. Jesus says, go another one. Now that's required of you. Not by the law that the Romans established, but by Jesus' orders. Which, honestly, how many have walked a mile before? Personally, for me, I say it's not fun. Unless you have good music that you're listening to. Which, not exactly trying to put in a shout out for KVMV, but if you want workout music, you can go turn on 96.9. So, in regards to this, walking a mile takes a long time if you're walking. Makes it even more tiresome if a guy hands you all of his stuff so that he can walk easy. So at the end of the mile, you're likely thinking, glad it's over. Like, probably don't even want to hand the guy the stuff. Literally just want to like drop it and just turn and walk away with maybe shaking the dust off your feet, kind of an attitude. However, Jesus says, once you get to the end of the first mile, go another one with him for free. It's kind of like a McDonald's deal or something. Go 1 mile, get another free, or something. But in that regard, that's the philosophy and the idea that Jesus is teaching in this passage, is that you repay evil with good to the other people. Which, in later passages with that verse that says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, Jesus literally says after that, therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And the other passages like that. And something that's interesting is that in that passage after that, Jesus literally says that in repaying kindness for evil, that you will literally, not literally, figuratively, be dumping basically charcoal on the other person's head. In the sense of conviction. And the fact that when you're rude to, when someone is rude to you, and you're nice to them in return that same instant, it doesn't click right away. And over time, the other person starts feeling worse about it due to the fact that you've never given them, or you haven't really given them anything to be doing that for. If you got in a fight with them, then that would just start a big conflict, and that would likely never end. But by repaying kindness and whatnot, you're basically making them the only one in the wrong. And the more they do that, they just keep getting more and more the only one in the wrong, to the point where it's like you look like a perfect person to them. And they start wondering, why am I doing what I'm doing to this person who literally doesn't do anything back? That's not right. Even in the eyes of the world, that's not right, which is interesting. And then this last verse, give to him that asketh of thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn thou not away. And this thought came to me as I was reading this passage earlier today. From him that would borrow of thee, turn thou not away. Here's something that I think absolutely everybody is guilty of. How many, when you're in the car going down the street, try your absolute hardest not to make eye contact with the people that are asking for money? Why? Obviously, because we don't want to give them anything at that time. Could also possibly be that we don't have anything to give them at the time. Which, always a great idea to keep small bills with you on hand, simply for that very sake, so that you can be a blessing to those people. Because literally, God says tons and tons of stuff about the way we should treat the poor, not just in Jesus' day, but across all of history and whatnot. God very much is in favor of the plight of the less fortunate people. That's why I believe he gives lots of Christians well-paying jobs and things like that, so that we can be a blessing to those that are less fortunate. However, often in the hustle and bustle of life, and the fact that we don't want to say take the time to roll down the window and reach into our pocket, even though that only takes about maybe 10 seconds or something. We would rather just pretend that we don't acknowledge them. A very, very sad thing to do. I've had several people, praise the Lord, that going around, I've had the opportunity to lead to the Lord, that were asking for money on the side of the road. Several people. Some of them weren't actually even homeless. They were trying to raise funds so that they could help their grandparents who had a fire recently at their house. Which, interesting stories if you stop and talk to the people on the road. Some of them you kind of have to be careful with, due to the fact that some of them could say like 5 different stories to 5 different people, just so that they can say, get a box of cigarettes or a beer or something like that. So you do need to be cautious regarding that. And also, I guess everyone should take their parents' advice that every parent has undoubtedly told their children at one point or another, so much so that it has become basically a stereotype of parents to their children. Don't talk to strangers. It's like, yes, we hear that all the time. However, there is truth to that. Be very, very careful about the people that you come into conversation with. However, for the people that are asking for money, God never, you notice never in the Bible when God is talking about giving to the poor, he never once says, ask them what they're going to use it for. Which is kind of an interesting thing, because when the Bible was being written, and God already knew what life was going to be like in the 21st century with people that are living on the streets and in homeless shelters, stuff like that, who don't make the wisest choices with money. And yet he did not choose to add a verse into the Bible for us here in the future to say, if they're buying alcoholic beverages, don't give them money. Or if you suspect that they're doing that, don't give them money. Well, a quick story that I felt kind of guilty about was there was one man, I remember, told me that he wanted to buy a drink. So I gave him about $1, $2 if I'm not mistaken. Went inside the gas station, got a drink for myself, something like that, and or while I was walking around the aisles, saw him at the checkout. Obviously, he couldn't see me buying a box of cigarettes with the very $1 I gave him to get a drink. He walked out. After a while, I walked out as well, saw him smoking a cigarette. And as I walked away, I told him, enjoy your drink. You know what he did? Just smiled and waved. Because it was too late. However, afterwards, I felt ridiculously guilty because it's not my place to try to one-up him afterwards by a sharp comment about how I feel about how he lied to me or something like that. That's God's responsibility to convict him of that. It's not mine. And last thing, as we're closing, is something else that I noticed with these, these verses that we've looked at, is that just like with the Old Testament, when equal retribution was, or equal judgment was given to the other person, literally in each of these passages, each of these verses, Jesus is literally saying, do the opposite of what he just did and make it an equal amount of goodness as it was of evil. In the sense that when he says, someone forces you to go 1 mile, in retaliation, he should go with you 1 mile someplace. However, you go the 2nd mile with him, which is basically his portion that he should have paid. You do that for him. Same with the coat and the court. In that regard, afterwards, a person under God's law would more than likely be totally, legally acceptable in suing that guy for his cloak. Except that with this passage, Jesus says, give him your coat as well. In other words, what he should have paid, you give to him on top of what he just did to you. Just like being slapped across the face in that illustration. Someone slaps you across the face, equal justice would be you slapping him right back across the face. So Jesus says, offer to take that for him. And let him slap you again in that regard. So that literally you are, in a sense, taking the retribution that he should have paid out of generosity and out of kindness. Unfortunately, in the day and age in which we live now, that is seen as weakness. Notice how, let's see, don't know how many hands I'm going to get raised for this one, but how many have seen Captain America Civil War? All right. Here's here's basically the short version that basically is the only part that's important for this point I'm going to make from it. Captain America and Iron Man get into a fight. And that's basically a summary of the whole movie, actually. So, but with that, if they were following the teachings of the Bible or something like that, as soon as, say, Iron Man threw a punch or something, Captain America should have just braced himself for another one and not given him one right back. And doing that, what do you think would have happened to Tony Stark? Probably would have made him angrier because Captain America is being the perfect Boy Scout that he always is, once again. But in that regard, it totally doesn't click. Like, nobody would watch that movie probably if one guy's fighting the other guy and the other guy doesn't like fight back. If he just, I guess as the expression goes, takes it like a man. Even though that kind of has almost an idea of you get pride from that as well. So that isn't exactly the best illustration for what Jesus wants you to do. Jesus does not at all want you to go the second mile with the Roman soldier so that you can tell him all the way, see how good I am. That totally defeats the point of you going the second mile. Jesus would probably say at that point, stop walking. Because you're just embarrassing me. So this whole passage that Jesus is teaching at this point is when someone does something against you, basically give them the equivalent of that in kindness. Unfortunately, that is still, once again, seen as weakness in the world today. Trying to think of a great example of that. Here's a great no, wait. I don't think anyone's seen that either. Les Miserables. I'll just explain that real quick. Yes, my mom's seen it. But there's this man, Jean Valjean, the main character. During the French Revolution, it's, musical. And at the start of the story, he is in prison due to the fact that he stole a loaf of bread. And I forget how many years of prison he gets. But because of that, makes him absolutely hate society, give up on society and whatnot. And if I remember correctly, there's a man named Javert, who is the officer who's the one responsible for turning him in. When he finally gets out of jail and gets finished with his sentence, everybody knows he's a criminal, so he decides he's going to live like a criminal, and then gets shown mercy by a guy from a church, and decides that he's going to turn over a new leaf. Becomes a man that nobody recognizes at that point because he's such a generous man at that point. After that, one thing leads to another. It gets found out by the same guy who imprisoned him in the first place that he's the same guy, and he hasn't checked back in to basically his equivalent of his parole officer of the time. And so because of that, by the law, he deserves to go back to prison. And the officer is the kind of person who says justice must be done despite the cost of it. So has no pity whatsoever on this guy because he's a criminal. He deserves to go back to prison and whatnot. Over the course of, I believe about 70% of the rest of the story is just him running from one place to another trying to get away from that guy. Then at the end of the story, he decides that, if I'm not mistaken, he decides he's going to turn himself in to that guy in exchange for something else that he wants, like his this little girl that he's somewhat adopted, not being taken back to foster care or something like that. And literally is willing to turn himself over to that guy. Right in front of him. The guy, doesn't try to fight, doesn't try to run away again, anything like that. Literally decides that he's going to repay that guy, I guess, what would be the kindness of letting him do his job and take him to jail, willingly, without putting up a fight. The guy doesn't get it, and it doesn't click, to the point where he literally goes insane because he doesn't know what to make of it anymore. The law is telling him to do one thing, however, his conscience is telling him to do something totally different because it's not fair for this man. So with regard to the entire humanity and whatnot, it doesn't make sense when someone's rude to another person and the other person is nice to the other person back. So I guess I'll end with a phrase that I really like, because it does somewhat make fun of retribution by kindness, in a sense, or I guess make light out of doing something like that and encourage you to do it more. Is basically, for the person that's rude to you, kill him with kindness. Almost gives you the sensation that you're getting retribution. Only it's the exact opposite of retribution. However, it has a lot more of an effect than would a standard typical retribution, which would be slapping the guy across the face right back. So let's go ahead and close in word of prayer.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. We thank you for this time that you've given us. We thank you for your blessings, for your word. We thank you for Jesus, for his sacrifice for us. And we thank you for this teaching that we have, Father. Help us, Father, in our daily lives to not repay evil with evil, Father, but to be lights in this world and to be kind to those even when they are not to us, Father. Help us to be examples to them of the way that you lived your life and the way that you would have us to live your life, Father. We ask that you'd go before us throughout the rest of this day and this week. Please be with all of us as we go our separate ways. Please bring us back safely on Sunday, and may this food that we're about to receive be a blessing and a nourishment to our bodies. In Jesus' name we ask all these things. Amen.